Do you love your job? Yes. Do you like your boss? Yes. Do you like your organization? Yes. Are you happy? No. Right? So that's a very contradicting question. And the only answer to me was, if I can't sort it out in my head, let me go and ask for help.
Hello listeners, my name is Mridvika and this is Just an Ordinary Mom podcast. I really am just an ordinary mom of twin boys with a high-speed career, and this podcast is to tell the stories of ordinary moms doing extraordinary things. And today I have an extraordinary mom, Swati Shah Gupta, with us. Swati and I have been neighbors for over a decade, but we only first met each other in a job interview. She and I overlapped at Teach for India for a year. We became good teammates first and even better neighbors thereafter. Since then, we have both moved jobs but stayed in touch. Swati has 2 daughters who are smart, intelligent, and witty just like her. Swati started her career with infrastructure consulting firm CRISIL and worked her way up in the corporate sector for 10 years before pivoting to the social and development sector. Her work in this space has spanned across fundraising, impact investing, and most recently in impact evaluation. In the episode today, Swati talks to me about how everyone's calling is their own and how easy it is to slip into self-berating looking at someone else's success. Swati, thank you so much for making the time to come and talk to me.
Absolutely, Mridvika. I mean, if you plan something like this, there is no way that I can say no. And second, also, it's one of the rare opportunities to actually talk about the realities behind the beautiful facade that we have.
Motherhood. Great. So Swati, why don't we get started with you telling me a little bit about what was it like growing up for you? I know you as a person for several years now, and I know that you grew up in an academic household with parents being professors and teachers. Tell me a little bit about what was that like in early years of your childhood?
So I think for me, the memories of childhood, one is seeing my house, which was at some point a 1 BHK, then a 2 BHK, etc., just filled with students studying all the time. And I think that one thing that it just told us, one was everything is possible just based on education. And also because I came from a reasonably lower middle income background. I mean, how much does a municipal school teacher really earn, right? So I think that also helped us see the growth of my own family, like our family of 4, from a joint family 1 room to a 1 BHK to a 2 BHK to a 3 BHK, just by some honest earning living. So education can really be a game changer. I have seen it in our own lives. I have seen it in the life of my mom. I have seen it in the lives of those hundreds of children who would be, kids of, let's say, a guard or a carpenter or a draftsman, and those kids going to the IITs of the world and just completely coming back transformed after a decade. I think in very, very subtle levels, I didn't know the power of the environment I was living in, but it definitely, I think, ingrained that deeply, the power of possibility and the power of education, I think, very strongly.
What did your parents teach? What were they,
subjects.
So
my dad used to teach chemistry to 11th and 12th kids, and he used to teach in a low-income municipal school. And my mom used to teach mathematics to one of the fanciest South Campus colleges in Delhi. So yeah, a very science-driven background as well. Yep.
And that must have shaped early years of your career as to what you wanted to become, what courses you wanted to take while you were studying yourself. Did that influence a lot?
That's a very interesting question. There is no direct correlation, honestly. It's just that because the family was filled with academic achievers. My mom was a doctorate from IIT Delhi in times when no woman of her family, even my mamas for that matter, like her own brothers, graduating was a big deal, right? And being a daughter where my masis would have done barely, let's say, their grade 6th or grade 10th, her going on to do a doctorate from IIT was a big deal. So because I came from that environment where academic excellence is like the foundation of doing everything. We didn't come from a family of money. So I think going to the best institutions was critical. Performing extremely well at studies was a given. But I also always had the freedom, again with my mother's repeat statement, that whatever you do, be the best at it. And she always used to say, mochi bhi banoge to gali ka sabse mashhoor wala banna. So no profession was ever looked down upon, but excellence, I think, was always expected in everything. And it also was unconventional. This was the conventional part. The unconventional part was that up to class 10th, the only thing I did at school was extracurriculars. I was never inside the classroom. Even at home, once my parents would get free, I would only be practicing my speeches, my poems, my theater dialogues. That's all we as a family were doing. They just knew that academics were taken care of. So my mom was just asked, okay, homework done? Yeah. Prep for exam done? Yes. Because the joy really came from everything else that we did. So yeah, I mean, I'm really fortunate. I think that it was not about reading books and practicing sums all the time, but it was being a lot about making the most of the academic opportunities that we had.
So growing up, obviously seeing a working mother, such a highly qualified and well-educated mother, was the vision of, what womanhood would look like for you normalized with what you saw?
Yeah.
Or did you have other visions of, seeing in friends' households or other people that you met along the way, that womanhood could be, different than what you saw in your own household?
Yeah, again, so I think while I was growing up, I didn't even have a view on this. But now that I think about it, I had a great mix of women who were extremely qualified and working and earning, my mom being one of them. And the other extreme of, let's say, my own grandmom, which is my dadi, or let's say one of my mommies, who were not very high on education themselves, and they were, full-time house moms or homemakers.
Yeah.
But I never saw any differentiation in the respect they got in their respective families. Of course, there is a whole cultural context, right? My father comes from a Gujarati background where, in general, while women are expected to do a lot of cooking,
Yeah.
and there is a lot of significance of following the religious customs and all of that, but there is a lot of regard, lot of say, decision-making power with the women in the household. As contrast to some extent with, my mother's side of the family, which comes more from a UP Delhi background, where yes, I mean, the patriarchy is a little more obvious, where,
Yeah.
all the men would sit down to eat first, etc. But despite that, I think the respect that we had for any of my aunts, whether they were working or not working, I never heard any major distinction around it, which is
Yeah.
great. And yet, the commitment that my mom had towards her work was so high. And yes, I mean, not so secretly, me and my sister, we took a lot of pride in the fact that our mom was so smart, so well-dressed. She had this great social circle with another set of really brilliant people. And I think that brought a lot of value to our lives of knowing that this life is possible. So because of that, I think not working, for example, or not earning was almost not a future that my sister or I would have even considered for ourselves.
Yeah.
Even till date, when
Yeah.
I have been on crossroads, I have never thought of the possibility of not being
Independent person.
of not being an earning person. I'm consciously not using the word working because I think you're working either ways.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the society is just unnecessarily boxed working mothers, non-working
Working,
mothers.
yeah.
And so how did this shape into your view of this is the kind of life partner I would want to have? Because, obviously when one decides to have a certain kind of life choices, how did you sort of evaluate Sumit against all those check boxes that you have in mind?
Yeah. Again, when you are a 21-year-old, you don't have that level of clarity. But at a very subtle level, I have again been raised in a household which had a reasonable level of gender balance. Now that I'm a mother myself and I look at my mom's responsibilities, I would not say that there is as much gender parity as I would like. She still needs to cook.
Of course.
She still needs to run the household. But I think in pretty much all the other household chores, it was never that my dad would have be on a different pedestal or anything. In fact, even us kids had a lot of responsibilities. So it was not that my mother is supposed to keep our room clean, or if the maid doesn't show up, then she is going to, be the backup. Not
Yeah.
at all. I think all four of us, ever since I remember even in kindergarten days, I had specific responsibilities towards the household. which influenced me to choose a partner who at least had the capability
I like the word the capability.
of dealing with a woman who would want to be seen as equal. And it's not easy or obvious. So I met Sumit at a point where I had just joined my job. Both of us were at the exact same point of our career, fresh out of our B schools. We were at the same CTC levels for the record. And both of us within first 6 months knew that respectively we were also doing pretty well in our respective departments. Interestingly, I was already traveling a lot from day one of my job. And he had, let's say more usual, a desk job, like a city, like a, he would stay in the same city, go to same office at the same hours. And I'd never found him being intimidated with this piece.
Got it.
Right?
Yeah.
And even then, back then, I very subtly knew that is super critical.
Yeah.
Second, very may sound funny, but another simple fact was that he had been a hostler for 7 years. He had been out of home and he has been raised in a very conventional environment where, mummy, chachi, didi, sisters would be available to, make him a cup of tea, fold his clothes, prepare him food. He kind of never really had any real responsibilities at home as a kid or as a teenager and was very used to having, mom or chachi or whoever being available to actually do his stuff. As simple as that. But I think those 7 years of hostel again gave him some sense of responsibility, at least of self-care. And I noticed that pretty early on.
That he was self-reliant and independent. And
yeah, I think emotionally, physically, basic life skills, cooking not included. But he knew how to take care of himself and did not need that constant chai la ke do attitude.
So
I think that these two factors definitely, I think, were important to me. And I've had, let's say, friends which could have, turned out into relationships. And I sensed pretty often that even guys who were doing academically as well, my own batchmates, or even better, at some point of time, the moment it would come to a conversation or relationships, there is this bit of sense of intimidation of how am I going to deal with a girl who will be earning as much, of what if she earns more? What if she's not like the most ideal daughter-in-law? They had their own definitions about it. Thankfully, Sumit did not come with this whole laundry list of his own. I think I didn't have a list, but he definitely had a very small list.
That's great.
So I think that just gave me a lot of relief.
Got it. And how involved Sumit has been, in your career decisions, and how much do you guys even sit and talk about what you want to do versus what he wants to do in his professional life?
Yep. So I'll correct you on that piece. So it's not about what he'll do versus what I do. I think it's still like a lot of after 17 years of being married and 18 years of having known him. We talk a lot about work all the time. In fact, it's 80% of our conversations, right? Thankfully so. It's not that we just discuss groceries and guests and furniture. We genuinely talk a lot about work, what's happening in the markets, what's happening with clients, what are the future trends that we expect when we plan our respective career moves. We are also blessed in a situation where both of us at least come from a similar industry. Thankfully, we started in the same organization, though very different profiles. So I think that has definitely given both of us, not just me, I think him as well, a lot of immediate sounding board to plan our careers. Having said that, after motherhood, my considerations were not just very, what is the job offering? I think the employer's environment, it almost becomes a lifestyle choice. And also because I work in very, very niche spaces in terms of sectors, which is where I also have a huge mind of my own. But his opinion is always very much on the table. And when things don't go well, how to deal with our teams, our managers, the office politics, we talk about it all the time. I mean, who else will we go and talk to?
Yeah. Does it ever come to you where it's like, just because he's saying I shouldn't take his advice, does that kind of play on your mind at all? And you'll go ask 10 other people for their opinions.
So lately, for specific aspects of my work, yes. So 6 years back, when I moved out of a full-time corporate role, when I started thinking of having a startup, building one, or working as a freelancer, there, I think initially while He was continued to be my thought partner, my closest mentor, confidant, whatever you'll say. But at some point of time, maybe within 6 to 8 months itself, I realized that his benchmark of success, which comes from a typical corporate job definition, right? While I was redefining success for my own self, it was very difficult to expect that level of empathy from him because he had never been in a situation like mine before. So initially it came with a sense of frustration because I continued to look at my success from his eyes also, including my parents, in fact, as well. So for me, my parents and my husband
Still continued to define.
continue to be my barometers of success. Like I need to see myself successful from their eyes also. And it has been a very conscious bit of a personal transformation last 2 years that I have been on. But I know that it is an integral part of how I view my own self. But at some point of time, I realized that the career backgrounds that my parents had, which is a government job, working 9 to 2, which is where there is no real sense of competition or evolution or change of profiles. They had their challenges, but a corporate career path is very different from that of a teacher's. Second is, from Sumit's perspective, at some point of time, salaries, brands, negotiation power are your typical barometers of success, and that's an environment I was in for 15 years as well. But the moment you stand out of the door of that fancy office in BKC
Yeah.
without a logo
Or a
of
visiting
brand
card.
or a visiting card, it's a completely different ballgame, right? While I would keep seeking advice, I
Yeah.
realize I cannot let anyone, for that matter,
Yeah.
define my parameters of success.
Yeah, very profound. It's a good segue into just like looking back 20 years that you've been working, right? Like you've seen the corporate world and then you freelanced for a bit, you ventured into social impact and development space. Just talk to me a little bit about, how you traversed that journey. What were some of the, pivot defining moments for you?
So, Mridvika, the way I see my career, I always was clear about working at the intersection of my sense of purpose in a competitive environment. So for me, that was the
What is
criteria.
competitive
So
environment?
competitive environment, okay, where I get the best of talent and brains around me.
Where you rub shoulders with the best and the brightest.
That's it, right? So that's all that mattered to me. And let me add the third criteria where I had a decent salary. So I never had the ambition that, I need to be the most paid amongst blah, blah, blah. Whether it was my B school batch or even my own peers at the same organization or friends. But earning a good, impressive salary, anything which is impressive in my own head was important. But it was a multi-dimensional decision making from day one. The fact that I almost chose to sat out of the placements of my B school where we had the best options, I chose even at that time that I want to be in infrastructure consulting space. Thankfully, my entire batch knew that. And so
Yeah.
it was almost like a conspiracy of universe of me landing in Crystal to begin with. But I knew that that's the space I want to work in. Clearly, I think somewhere seeing the way my parents contributed to the community unknowingly. For them, it was a job. They were teachers. They would run tuitions at home. For them, possibly it was all an economic decision or a financial decision. The way I viewed it as a child, from a bit of a distance, when I would see the son of a guard who could barely clear his 10th and was almost on the verge of flunking, go to a point of having a very beautiful private sector job because my dad would just not let go of him. They created a huge impression on me. So
That's
just,
where your sense of purpose.
yeah, it
stemmed
was
from.
just very natural to me, right? And thirdly, possibly because while I said that, we moved from a 1 BHK to a 3 BHK, etc., I think our general standard of living, our relationship with money didn't change, which also led me to, thankfully, not have a big craving for expensive brands or cars or whatever. So my lifestyle choices, or let's say my relationship with money, again has been more or less constant. Thankfully, that allowed me to choose jobs rather than the jobs to choose me. So everything that I did after joining Crystal in an infrastructure consulting space, all the way to what I do today, where I work with impact-focused funds, to me, I'm still working in the overlap of where commercial capital, all forms of capital, whatever I can do to get them to a place where that money is used the best possible way, closest to the bottom of the pyramid. To me, that has always been gratifying, and I have just continued to be in that space. The shape and form of my jobs, of the structure of my job, how well defined my visiting card looks, or how many seconds does it take for me to answer a question, what do you do? I think that has changed. But in my mind, I never pivoted from a corporate to a development sector. In my mind, I have always been working in development sector, but in jobs which in most cases would pay me reasonably well.
Yeah. How did you find, you were with Crystal for 10 years. How did you find purpose and meaning in doing the infrastructure consulting work that you were doing there?
Yep. So, maybe like a lot of kids of my generation, and again, propelled by my parents, at some point I was like, okay, I want to, go for civil services exam, UPSC karna hai, bureaucrat banna hai, desh ki seva karni hai, right? All of that. And also because of, all the intellectual challenges that it comes with. And since like that didn't really happen, for me, if I'm not a bureaucrat, let me work with a bureaucrat. Right? So that's how Crystal was. And practically, I would look at every project. Also, the way I think my manager at that time, I think now that I think about it, he was like really wise for his years. Realize that that's the key to ensure that I stay motivated. So every time a new consulting project would land, from Government of Gujarat on a water policy project, from a Municipal Corporation of Delhi on a real estate regulation project, you'd be like, Swati, imagine when you do this project, the potential of taxpayers' money that you can save by doing this job really well. And I was like, yeah, of course, it makes sense, right? And I think I never looked at my job as writing yet another consulting report. I really got kicks out of the fact
that you were solving a real issue.
And some of that actually fructified over the years as well. And I always thankfully never needed that external motivation. I just felt really proud of pretty much every consulting assignment that I ever laid hands on.
Yeah. So you always come across to me as someone who's never shied away from investing in your personal growth. And when I say investing, it's consciously investing time, money, energy, on things that you could otherwise be, spending, time with your family or like on a vacation and stuff like that. And so whether it was seeing you do the landmark course or for me to see you, write exams to go study at UPenn, to even the other day when we were discussing about your potential idea of like still continuing to look at a international development course. What has prompted these decisions, and, how do you in your own head justify the cost versus the returns on whatever it is that you try to, work upon?
Right. So just taking that cue from what I mentioned earlier of my school years, I never was sitting in the classroom, right? So all the joy of doing all the hard work of scoring things on my report card actually came from the fact that I was on stage performing theatre, being a part of dance recitals, being a part of my sports team, debating clubs, all of that, right? So that's the sort of person that I am. That for me, yes, I am pretty self-motivated when it comes to work. But for me as a person to genuinely stay happy, I need a lot of these extracurriculars in life, right? Which also meant that at some point, I went for my first ever Vipassana course within 3 years of my corporate job. It didn't even have anything to do with motherhood. Yeah. I didn't even have kids at that time. But for someone who wants so much out of life, and has that demands coming from both sides of the brain constantly and relentless hours at work, right? That starts building up some sort of that emotional stress, where I felt that I feel very content with my work. Do you love your job? Yes. Do you like your boss? Yes. Do you like your organization? Yes. Are you happy? No. Right? So that's a very contradicting question. And the only answer to me was, if I can't sort it out in my head, let me go and ask for help. So it started from there, where I first did my Vipassana course ever, or I would join, or I would commit time to, let's say, a dance class once in a while, even if I had to say no to a weekend project with my boss. I got pretty famous for saying no. I was like, you're making me famous to say no to a weekend project? Just because I'm not spending my Sunday evening at work. But anyways, those were the days. So I think for me, it was finding that balance for that creative outlet that my brain always needed. That's one part. After motherhood entered my life. I think after that, there was this another dimension of what needed all my emotional energy, physical energy, my time, attention, all of that. And again, at some point, because of that, investing in my sanity, in my happiness became very important. So all of this were still these extracurricular sort of classes, etc. But investment in professional learning, that I realized was very, very critical because of two reasons. One is the moment I stepped out of my full-time corporate job, now it was just me. Swati was the brand. And when you have to uphold your own name as the brand, you need to know what's happening around you, right? Now, a corporate job, despite all the negatives that we discuss, let me also tell you, comes with a natural learning environment all the time. It's structured trainings that the company pays enrolls you in. You go for these conferences, you go for these network building meetings, a lot of these events. Plus, you don't, at least in a consulting environment again, you're not just doing your own job. You are always exposed to 15 other projects that are happening on the same floor.
Yeah.
So you're always tuned into what's happening in the sector, right? And if you have any questions about, or you have any plans about, okay, let's do this cutting edge research, you have a manager to go and act as your natural mentor. But when you work alone, pretty much have to be all of this to your own self. Right? And I cannot just keep reaping what I did of first 15 years of my career. I need to move forward. I need to keep investing and building upon everything that's happening in the sector. That's one. So anybody who is a freelancer, whoever chooses to, be a key professional in a startup, either as a founder or as a founding team, I think investing in learning of any form, soft skills, hard skills, building your
industry
networks,
related
very,
things.
very, very critical. It's like, it's a survival factor now. Second, for me, it was especially critical because I work in niche spaces.
Yeah.
Where, as a developing country, in sustainable finance, in impact measurement, even in philanthropic capital raising for that matter, right? A lot of things that we are talking about now have already been tried, tested, all of that in
other parts of the world.
In other parts of the world, especially US, Europe, right? Climate change as an area of work was initiated in Europe a decade back. And we are like all waking up to that reality now, right? ESG as an area of work. Suddenly you have this slew of demand in the Indian subcontinent, but European companies have had ESG performance managers ever since, right?
Yeah.
At least last decade. So again, as a professional who's working on a reasonably futuristic sector, I need to know where the conversations are headed.
Yeah.
I have to be ahead of the curve. So I anyways love being an environment of learning.
You love being a student.
I love being a student.
Yeah.
So, it's like I'm raised by teachers.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about so first 15 years of your career was with organizations, other companies, and then you ventured into, starting on all by yourself. Did that choice come from a place of becoming a mother, or was that because you weren't able to find, the intersection of what you were looking for in a job or a career?
Again, I would say it's a combination. There is
of both.
no particular point where I was like, okay, this is exactly what I want to do, and this corporate job does none of that. Because I was fortunate to have employers, fortunate to have been selected by employers that I chose to work with, let me put it that way, who were already working in spaces that I was deeply interested in. But yeah, I think jumping off the corporate treadmill is what I call it. Once you jump on it, you're always on it, right?
Well, treadmill is more like a hamster wheel. But
Yeah. Right? But yes, I chose to find that courage or give an actual action to my courage of saying that if after 2 kids, I can get a 40% increment and be selected to work at a mid-senior position while a clear shift of profile, all of that, then I must be genuinely good. There must be something in me that I'm bringing to the table, right? It's just not moving in a very straight line sort of a corporate path. Right? And while in the first 15 years, I had already shifted 2 or 3 jobs. I had already worked at a non-profit. I had worked at corporate strategy roles. And now I was moving to an investment banking setup. So I knew that I can survive in very varying job situations.
Yeah.
Which means that there are some core skills that I have in me which helped me fit myself or plug myself into very varied corporate situations. So thankfully, those shift of jobs got me that insight into my own strengths professionally. But what really, I think, gave me the courage or the propel to say that, okay, let me move out of it, was the fact that I knew that after having worked for 15 years, the minimum seniority or responsibility that the corporate world expects from me cannot be executed, at least in India and in Mumbai, with my own nuclear setup in a 9-to-5 job environment. At least not mentally. Right?
Or physically, like you get stuck in traffic 2 hours each.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So Bombay, nuclear family, all of that, right? So
the fact that there was a certain way you wanted your kids to be raised.
All of that, right?
Yeah.
So all of that was all coming together. My ambition as a professional was on a high. My ambition as a parent was on a high. And I'm always ambitious when it comes to my own personal development. I cannot completely give my health and my need for creativity a backseat, because that's the only way that I can keep myself happy. So with all of these demands, I realized that I need to have a very customized career plan. And I cannot keep waiting endlessly for the right employer to, make it super customized for me. So I was like, okay, if I were an employer, what would I do for a woman like me, who was brilliant, who was ready to work hard, who could put in 10 hours of work, just not sitting at your desk all the time?
Yeah.
What would that job look like? And then the answer was, then I need to be my own employer. And let me see if I can pay myself enough and give myself great working conditions. Right? So that kind of became the answer. So it was a challenge that I took up on myself.
What were some of the insecurities that came along with this? I'm sure there would have been moments of self-doubt when you go out with Sumit, to friends, and when people ask, like, how are you doing? What are you doing? And so what were those moments of self-doubt and insecurities that came along with being a solopreneur?
So what word to nahi hai, Mridvika? It's like till date, every day, it's the self-doubt is pretty much a part of the perks of being a solopreneur. Let me put it very clearly. Because again, there is no salary, there is no increment, there is no annual appraisal where somebody gives you a pat on the back and saying, that's Swati, you're awesome, you're a rock star. Those days are behind me, right? So self-doubt to hai hi. Now, speaking especially from a social piece of self-doubt, professional piece though is a little more obvious.
Yeah.
Social piece was pretty interesting and continues to be. So, earlier it's like, hi Sumit, what do you do? I do so-and-so at so-and-so bank. Wow, fancy. Swati, what do you do? And then I don't have a designation or a brand to talk about. So it takes a little longer, right? So I would say, okay, I work independently and acha, okay. So man, imagine I'm talking about this 6 years back. So where is your office? I work from home or I work from a co-working space? Acha. After 30 seconds, the conversation ends. Because it's like, but she's not really doing anything really serious. Acha, shock ke liye kar rahi ho tum? So I'm like, no, this is not a hobby. I have a fairly serious, demanding, maybe more demanding than a corporate job sort of a role. I'm working with the best of the clients. And I'm getting them all on my own.
Yeah.
Without an institution to back me. But genuinely, typically, patience, worldview, whatever. Socially, people just don't know how to appreciate a solopreneur. And at least now startup has become a fancier word. In the last 6 years, thank God, I don't use that word at all. But now, after 5 or 6 years, I have, again, as I said, I have just stopped seeking that approval from the external world, because I just genuinely know that what I'm doing is so awesome.
I know, Swati, you are someone who basically likes to work on themselves, but I've also seen you being an equally involved mother and an equally involved, more like friends to your daughters, right? Like, how does it feel to raise 2 daughters, while giving them the exposure that, at some level you didn't have growing up? And what does it feel to raise 2 daughters in a world that we live in today?
So I have, great benchmarks set by my parents. We never had any conversation, at least not the time I was about to get married, where my parents would have even mentioned a statement, but you can't do this because you're a girl, right? In fact, I sometimes feel that they went to the opposite extreme of, I was raised in Delhi and, my mom just said, you want to, choose to study in this college, which is 30 kilometers from your house. But mom, how am I gonna travel? There is public transportation. right? And obviously, like, if anybody amongst the audience has ever, is a Delhi resident and you've traveled by public transportation as a girl and as a teenager, it's a war, right? And you have to wear your armor. And within 15 days, I would come back like with tears welled up in my eyes. And it happened every other day. And here I was, a reasonably strong person, physically, emotionally, all of that. But for me, for my parents, they were like, this is a part of the deal.
Yeah.
You want to study, you have to crack it on your own. Yes, we do have a car, but don't think that you'll have that luxury, right?
That you're going to be dropped.
Yeah, that you're going to be dropped. Don't even think about it.
Yeah.
Right? So the thing is that they were readying me for the world that was about to come. That's right. That was one. And I'm talking about college years. Even when I was in grade 8 and I got selected as a part of athletics team and I was supposed to go to school 1 hour earlier, my mom just said, I'll teach you how to take a bus. And I was barely 12.
Wow.
Right?
We can't think of sending kids, even like
just
2
to
blocks
go and
away.
buy a bread.
Yeah, 2 blocks away.
We can't, right? And yeah, there was Eve teasing. I still remember the first time I ever slapped a boy was on a DTC bus at 6 a.m. And I was damn scared after that because he knew which school I go to. But yeah, it was the first, that's the time that I think I learned how to fight back, right? And today, when after many years later that I joined Crystal and I was traveling not just to, big cities like Bangalore, but also to some very, very small towns like Dehradun or Veraval, like, towns that you haven't heard of, all by myself at all hours of the day. At some point, then I start traveling out of the country. I just, I went to Nairobi for that matter, right? And traveling by myself, traveling by using public transportation as well.
Yeah.
I think that all that toughening up really helped.
Yeah.
Because I had survived that. Now I know I can pretty much survive everything. And for me, that is the attitude that I think I have brought to my girls.
Yeah.
A huge sense of ownership at whatever they do.
Yeah.
Yes, I
am.
am.
One of your older ones published a book when she was like 10.
10,
10,
Yep. And I had not even proofread that book before it got published.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't sound too perfect or too fancy grammatically or vocabulary wise, she has to own that piece as well.
And now she blogs.
She blogs.
What is she now, 12?
She's 12, yeah. She blogs. She just has started traveling by Rick on her own because she has chosen to take up dancing very, very seriously. She chose an institute which is 6 kilometers away from our house. And I said that, at that time of the day, I'm busy with work and your dad may not be home. So how are you going to commute every day? So practically the only option is you'll have to learn how to go by a rig. And this is just 2 weeks back. She was like, are you serious? I'm like, if you really want to pursue something seriously, that's the price that you have to pay. So yes, we would sort of, empower her with maybe a phone connected to a Wi-Fi and a Paytm or whatever it takes. But she has to own that piece of hard work herself. Right? I cannot be a soccer mom, kind of running around with her. And especially now that I have 2 kids, it's not just one.
Yeah. And they're at different ages. So
absolutely. So I'm ambitious. I'm extremely ambitious for my kids. I'm ambitious as a parent, which doesn't mean that they need to be achieving all the time. I think that's a bit of a slight difference where I chose not to be exactly like my parents.
You don't need to necessarily live your dreams through them.
Exactly. Right? So my kids in many ways are very similar to me. The same gender also helps. Yeah. But then they're very uniquely, very, very different also. They like a certain pace of environment. They don't like having external benchmarks, references for their own definition of success. And they're ready to work much harder. They're far more serious about their passions that they take up. So yeah, I think the biggest lesson was that I have to figure a way that 4 of us in the family find a way to coexist. We all have to support each other, but it's not my kids' responsibility to ensure that they have a successful working mom by being, these ideal, self-feeding, self-raising kids. They are really, really good. But they're kids. They're kids, right? So they do need that hand-holding, that cajoling, that prodding, that nagging. They need all of that. And at the same time, I also believe that it's not solely my job to ensure that they have a good life.
Totally.
I can maybe just listen to them and tell them my perspective on what a good life can be. But they have to work hard pretty much on their own if they want to have all those experiences as well.
Yeah.
So it may sound a little extreme to some people, but even as a parent, I don't think I have a certain responsibility and job towards, my kids.
Yeah, no, totally. And I see you live that every other time, like, we've interacted. You've taken so many solo trips just to sort of rejuvenate as a mother. Tell me a little bit, maybe a minute or two about like what these solo trips have been about. And I'm sure you've inspired many mothers to do that. How has that liberated you?
So the first time I took a solo trip, non-working trip, was when I was 2 years into motherhood. So yes, my elder one was just 2 years. Because I am that highly ambitious and conscientious employee, mother, I just realized that if you really look at your days, you're answering the same questions day after day. Sometimes they just feel like so redundant also, but क्या खाना है? क्या बनेगा खाने में? आज कौन सी मेड आ रही है? आज बच्चे की कौन सी क्लास है? कौन लेके जा रहा है? ऑफिस में कौन सी मीटिंग है? क्या डेडलाइन है? So it's like at some point of time, you're answering like 5 dozen questions which are so small that nobody even notices that you're answering those questions. And you read these articles about the mental workload of a mother, and I'm answering those questions again being self-employed.
Yeah.
That comes with that additional layer because I'm also answering all these business development, salary, earning, future, diversification, all these questions for myself. There's no manager who's telling me what to do next.
Exactly.
Right? So I'm just saying that every day answering these same questions routinely, at some point you almost lose track of, do I really need to answer all these questions? Can I answer these questions differently? And what if I was not there? Could somebody else have answered these questions? When you are a default, perfect answer giver, really bad English, but nobody, it never goes out of your system and you become a part of that madness in some way. So I think the first time I took that break was just to take 3 days off where I do not answer that question. That's
how it got started.
That's how it got started. And I think every time I have taken that trip, within 6-7 hours of just leaving the house, the way I start looking at my own husband, my mates, my kids, my job, my career, health, suddenly I have a very different perspective because I'm able to look at my life from a distance. Right? So metaphorically, it's like, you're on a flight.
Yeah.
You have that 40,000 view of your own life in Mumbai. You cannot be in middle of it and still have an external view. I mean, it takes too much spirituality, too much meditation, which I'm not meant for. So then I realized that going away physically is the only way. And it also brought these very unexpected perks of a very natural empowerment that happens for people back home, that they realize that they can also pull off a lot of things and nothing truly falls apart if I'm not around. So yeah, suboptimality once in a while, but all of them survive almost to a point of thriving. They actually have a fairly good time when I'm not around.
Yeah, less rules.
One less person to ask questions to. So that's a good feeling. And third, again, the kind of people that you meet from very, very different life stages, backgrounds. You either come back with a lot of wisdom because of people who have treaded the same paths. So I meet a lot of women who are much elder to me, right? And their life wisdom is so heartening and so calming as well. And then there are much, much younger people who almost start looking up to you because, oh wow, you have a job, you have a husband, you have kids, you
have all figured out.
So sometimes you're like, wow, if I was looking at my current life 20 years back, I would have been mesmerized with where I am. So sometimes it's also a huge feel-good factor to look at your life from somebody else's perspective who's struggling to just figure out how would they ever find a life partner.
Yeah. No, that's very, very humbling, and I'm pretty sure, profound in many, many ways to you as well. Swati, what is that one piece of advice that you would give to another woman who wants to have a high-flying, ambitious career while feeling like she has been a reasonably successful mother, if she chooses to be one?
So not one, but two, right? As a parent, your kids' success and well-being, you are a huge part of it, but you're not all of it. So yes, you need to play a very active role, but you cannot either take credit or feel responsible for everything that's happening in their lives. So if you need to create some space for either others to contribute or letting go of some things, even if you consciously don't do it, you're naturally anyways doing it. So I think that the day you start accepting that lack of control and you stop craving for that credit, a huge part of this becomes simpler. Second, as a professional as well, for your kids, like every other book tells you, you are the first person, especially as a mother. I mean, I think both parents, you are the first people that they look up to. If you're not happy in your skin, if you're resentful towards your employer, if you are unsatisfied with your fitness levels, if you are always guilty as a mother, just imagine all of these vibes being transferred to your children as well. So how would they look up to you if you're not even happy in your own head? That's right. So defining success from any other books, podcasters, woman on stage, woman on LinkedIn, woman on a magazine cover, perspective, I think is a recipe for disaster. Every working mother has a very, very specific set of challenges, and those challenges will change every 6 months for the rest of your life. So I think, yes, it is inspiring, motivating to listen to others. Once in a while, if it works for you, great. Listen to all of this stuff, read all of this stuff, go and meet people whom you look up to. But you will need to define your success as a parent, as a professional, as a person, as a spouse, exactly for yourself. 80% of the younger mothers, or younger working women professionals, whoever speak to me are like, how did you do this, etc. How did you manage to reach? What can I do to be in your position? I would just, simply say that you need to define what's the position that works for you, right? The cost that I was ready to pay, you may not be ready to pay. And maybe the support system that I have, you may not have. And there is a certain level of physical, mental, emotional, professional fitness that I come with that you may not be blessed with. So I think this whole one-to-one comparison as a parent, as a professional, I think is a recipe for disaster. So yes, look up to others, but eventually you have to have a very, very personal definition of success, and do never cringe or regret changing that definition every 6 months. Like, what the hell, who cares?
Yeah. Swati, I've spoken to like umpteen number of times, but every time I speak with you, I get goosebumps because I come out with like another piece of wisdom or another punchline that I know I'm going to reflect on as I'm walking, as I'm sleeping, as I'm journaling, or I'm thinking about something. Thank you so much for coming and speaking to me and sharing your life journey and being so vulnerable about the challenges that come along with trying to live up to your own expectations, others' expectations of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely a pleasure.
And that was the episode of Just an Ordinary Mom podcast. Thank you so much, Swati Shah Gupta, for taking the time to be on the show. If you are an ordinary mom or know someone who could benefit from listening to this podcast, do share it with them. This podcast was recorded at Manic Pod Studios in Chembur, Mumbai. Our sound engineer is Shrey Tiwari and our producer is Vedant Naik. Thanks for listening.